Imagine sitting in this, like, secure, heavily fortified room in Riyadh. You know, you're a diplomat.
Right.
You're gathered there with all these counterparts from across the Arab and Islamic world, and you are desperately trying to negotiate a de-escalation to this massive crisis.
A crisis that's basically threatening the whole global economy.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. As you sit there, literal ballistic missiles are being intercepted in the sky, like right above your head.
Which is just wild to think about.
It's terrifying. Sirens are blaring. Refineries in the city are actually taking direct hits. And despite all of that, you are expected to just stay at the negotiating table.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a movie.
It really does. It sounds like some crazy political thriller, but that is exactly what happened this week. And that's the focal point of our deep dive today.
It is such a stunning visual, honestly, and it represents this massive paradigm shift in how geopolitical leverage is being applied, like, in real time.
For sure. So to understand how we got to that room in Riyadh, our mission today is to unpack this rapidly escalating, incredibly high-stakes crisis unfolding across the Middle East right now.
Yeah, we're looking at some really intense stuff.
We are. We're working off a recent intelligence and news briefing that details this, frankly, unprecedented expansion of hostilities in the Gulf region. But before we get into the actual timeline and the nuts and bolts of what is happening, I do want to establish a very firm baseline for you, the listener.
Good call. It's super important to frame this right.
Yeah, because the source material we are looking at today, it covers highly sensitive, incredibly politically charged events.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about military actions, economic targeting, and severe diplomatic fallout involving the U.S., Israel, Iran, and multiple Gulf states.
Right, a lot of major players.
Exactly. So I want to be crystal clear. Neither of us sitting at this table is taking a political side today.
Definitely not.
We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints or, the justifications presented by the nations involved. Our sole goal here is to impartially report the facts, the timelines, and the specific claims from the source material, just to help you understand these shifting dynamics.
Yeah, because objective analysis of the claims being made, that's really the only way to genuinely understand the mechanics of a crisis that is this volatile.
Right.
When the rhetoric gets this heated, stepping back to look purely at the strategic maneuvers is just essential.
Absolutely. So with that framework in place, let's look at the broader picture. If you think about the 2013 diplomatic normalization between these regional powers, it's kind of like a complex system of nuclear control rods.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Right, because it took painstaking, highly technical diplomatic engineering to insert those rods and cool down a very volatile regional reactor.
Yeah, it took years of work.
Years. But what the briefing shows us is that over the span of just a few weeks, those control rods haven't just been, adjusted. They have been violently ripped out.
Leaving the core entirely exposed.
Exactly, leaving the core entirely exposed.
Yeah.
So let's establish exactly what set this whole chaotic timeline in motion. According to the briefing, the exact trigger event occurred on February 28th, when the United States and Israel launched joint attacks against Iran.
Yeah, that February 28th event is the undeniable flashpoint here.
Right.
It's the kinetic action that basically sets the entire board in motion.
So Tehran's immediate response to those joint attacks was to unleash these massive waves of missile and drone strikes.
Yeah.
But here's the critical detail, and this is what really caught my eye.
Yeah.
These retaliatory strikes didn't just hit the initial attackers. The briefing confirms they impacted all 6 member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC.
Every single one of them.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you think of the February 28th joint attack as a geopolitical earthquake, these retaliatory drone and missile strikes are the aftershocks.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, yeah.
But they are washing up and violently hitting every single neighbor's shore. And the GCC, it's not just some loose collection of states.
No, not at all.
It is the economic and strategic anchor of the Arabian Peninsula. They are bound by mutual security interests, which leads me to this massive disconnect.
Right, yeah.
The targeting.
Yeah. Wait, if the initial attack was from the U.S. and Israel, why is the retaliation hitting all 6 GCC nations simultaneously?
Well, what's fascinating here is the collision of 2 completely different strategic narratives.
Okay.
Because in statecraft, the justification a nation publicly provides for a kinetic strike it's often just as important as the payload of the missile itself.
Wow, yeah. The story matters just as much as the weapon.
Exactly. So Tehran's stated justification, like their public claim, is that they are exclusively targeting U.S. military assets.
Assets that just happen to be there.
Right, assets that just happen to be geographically located within the borders of these Gulf states.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically attempting to frame this as a direct, proportional, and localized response to that February 28th trigger. So they are essentially trying to thread a diplomatic needle here. They're telling the Gulf states, like, hey, we aren't attacking your sovereignty, we are just attacking the U.S. assets parked in your backyard.
That is exactly the intended narrative, yeah.
Hmm.
However, and this is a big, however the states actually absorbing these strikes, they view the situation through an entirely different lens.
I bet they do.
Oh, yeah. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, he explicitly dismantled Tehran's excuse.
He didn't buy it at all.
Not for a second. He publicly dismissed the idea that these strikes are only targeting U.S. assets as, quote, unconvincing.
Unconvincing. That's a very polite diplomat word for we think you're lying.
Pretty much. But he actually went much further than that. He accused Iran of pre-planning these regional strikes against its neighbors long before the February 28th trigger even occurred.
Wait, really? So if Saudi Arabia is calling this out as premeditated, they are arguing that February 28th wasn't even the root cause of these strikes on the GCC.
Exactly.
They're saying it was merely a convenient geopolitical excuse to unleash an operational plan that was already sitting, like, fully drafted on a desk in Tehran somewhere.
Yeah, and honestly, the sheer logistical reality of warfare supports Saudi Arabia's skepticism here.
How so?
Well, think about it. Coordinating simultaneous waves of missile and drone strikes across 6 different sovereign nations.
Massive.
It's a massive logistical nightmare. You're talking about penetrating multiple different integrated air defense systems at the same time. You just do not improvise an operation of that staggering scale and complexity overnight.
Right, you can't just throw that together on a Tuesday.
No, not at all. It requires extensive targeting intelligence, synchronized launch windows, and, pre-positioned assets.
All right. If Saudi Arabia isn't buying the excuse that this is just about U.S. military targets, Iran's next move practically proves them right.
It really does.
Because the briefing details how the strikes rapidly evolved. They didn't just stay focused on military installations. They went straight for the economic jugular.
Which is a massive shift.
Huge. We see this massive shift from standard military retaliation into the realm of profound, systemic economic vulnerability.
And I would argue this shift is the most dangerous escalation in the entire briefing. I mean, it fundamentally changes the taxonomy of the conflict.
Let's look at the specific Wednesday detailed in our sources, because here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, that Wednesday was intense.
On this single day, an intense wave of attacks targeted energy facilities across Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates.
Just boom, boom, boom.
Right. And the briefing mentions widespread evacuation warnings for petrochemical plants. And the specific fallout is just staggering. In Qatar, they expelled Iran's military and security attaché after missiles caused damage near the Ras Laffan industrial area.
Which is a huge deal.
It is. For context for you listening, Ras Laffan happens to be the world's largest liquefied natural gas plant.
The largest in the world.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the UAE had to suspend operations at Abu Dhabi's Habshan gas facility following a separate Iranian attack.
Right.
So this isn't just a military tit-for-tat anymore. This is like sneaking into your neighbor's basement and smashing the circuit breaker for the entire global economy.
That's exactly what it is.
Hitting an LNG plant feels like a totally different category of warfare to me. It borders on financial terrorism. Take us into the mechanics of this. What actually happens when a facility like Habshan goes offline or Ras Laffan takes damage?
Well, to really understand the gravity of hitting Ras Laffan or Habshan, we have to look at the physics and the economics of liquefied natural gas and petrochemical processing in general.
Okay, break it down first.
These facilities, they are not standard industrial warehouses.
Right.
They are incredibly complex plants operating under immense pressure. They utilize highly volatile combustible materials at cryogenic temperatures.
It's extremely dangerous stuff.
Extremely. An emergency evacuation of a petrochemical plant is a harrowing process. You cannot simply flip a switch and turn the plant off like a light bulb.
You can't just power it down.
No. Emergency shutdowns involve flaring off massive amounts of gas, venting pressurized systems, and trying to secure volatile chemical reactions mid-process.
Just to prevent it all from blowing up.
Exactly, to prevent catastrophic explosions.
Wow. So if you're listening to this and wondering how a single missile strike in the Middle East affects your heating bill in Europe or, the inflation rate in the US, this is the exact mechanism.
Yes.
When a plant of that scale suspends operations to deal with an attack, the ripple effects are pretty much instantaneous.
They truly are, because when a facility like Ras Laffan suspends output, it breaches delivery contracts worldwide.
Oh, because the gas isn't shipping.
Right. The global energy market operates heavily on a spot market system. That means countries buy gas for immediate delivery based on the current supply.
Okay.
So when the world's largest supplier suddenly takes a massive volume of gas offline, those buyers panic.
They scramble to find it somewhere else.
Exactly. They flood the spot market, bidding against each other for whatever gas is left, and that violently spikes the price of energy globally.
Wow. So targeting these specific hubs, it sends a calculated, undeniable message from Tehran. They're basically saying, we have the capability to bypass your military defenses and strike directly at the engine that funds your nations and powers the world.
That is the exact message.
Well, the diplomatic response to that message was swift and severe. Like we mentioned, Qatar expelled Iran's military and security attaché immediately following the damage near Ras Laffan.
Which is huge.
Yeah, that goes far beyond a sternly worded letter of condemnation.
Oh, expelling an attaché is a profound severing of diplomatic architecture.
It's a really big deal, right?
Absolutely. Because an attaché is an official representative integrated into an embassy, they're legally protected by diplomatic immunity, and they serve as a direct liaison between militaries.
Okay.
By expelling them, Qatar is issuing a formal declaration that the presence of Iran's military representative is no longer tolerable on their soil. It is the diplomatic equivalent of, ripping up the communication lines and changing the locks on the doors.
And when your economic lifelines are being actively targeted and diplomatic doors are being slammed shut, the natural reflex of statecraft is to convene.
Right.
Yeah, you try to get everyone to talk.
You try to get everyone in a room to de-escalate. But the narrative in our briefing reveals that even these desperate attempts to cool the tension were directly and violently attacked. Which brings us back to that terrifying image we started with.
The Riyadh summit, the audacity of what happened during that summit cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a textbook example of asymmetric psychological warfare.
So let's paint the picture. An emergency meeting is called in Riyadh. Arab and Islamic foreign ministers fly in, gathering to forge a collective response and de-escalate a crisis that is rattling global markets.
Right.
And while they are literally in the middle of this summit, Saudi air defenses are forced to intercept 4 ballistic missiles directly over the capital city.
While they're in the room.
Yes, and it wasn't even a clean sweep. The Saudi foreign minister confirmed that 2 refineries in the city were actually hit.
Unbelievable. Prince Faisal addressed the attack immediately, of course. He confirmed the timing was a, quote, blatant attempt at blackmail and a deliberate effort to intimidate the assembled ministers.
Right.
And his response was incredibly stark. He said, all I can say is that we were not intimidated.
That takes guts.
It does. So help me understand the psychology here. Firing ballistic missiles at a capital city while the world's diplomats are sitting there trying to negotiate peace. What is the strategic value of flipping the negotiating table over before anyone has even sat down?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to recognize that in international relations, timing is a language all its own.
Okay.
Firing missiles during an emergency summit is not about the kinetic damage to those 2 refineries.
It's not about the refineries at all.
No. It is a massive, incredibly loud psychological message of dominance. By forcing Saudi air defenses to light up the sky over Riyadh while foreign ministers are reviewing security protocols, the message being sent to every diplomat in that room is very clear.
What are they saying?
They're saying, your summits do not protect you, we dictate the tempo of this conflict, and we can reach you anywhere.
Wow.
It is specifically designed to induce panic and fracture the unity of the allied nations present.
I mean, it forces every diplomat in that room to ask themselves if standing in solidarity with Saudi Arabia is actually worth the physical risk to their own lives and their own capital.
Exactly.
But Prince Faisal's response, stating publicly that they were not intimidated, that carries its own immense weight, doesn't it?
Yes.
It costs a diplomat a lot of political capital to say that while their city is actively burning.
Oh, it requires immense resolve. When you are the target of overt diplomatic blackmail and you publicly look your adversary in the eye and say, I am not intimidated, you neutralize their psychological weapon.
Right.
However, and there is a big however, by doing so, you also strip away any remaining diplomatic off-ramps.
You're kind of trapping yourselves.
Exactly. You back both nations into a corner where saving face requires further escalation.
And that dynamic is exactly what triggered the climax of this briefing. The missiles over Riyadh, combined with this absolute refusal to be intimidated, resulted in the kingdom's harshest rhetoric to date.
Oh, definitely.
We see a severe diplomatic pivot here that fundamentally alters the geopolitical landscape of the Gulf.
Yeah, the specific vocabulary used by Prince Faisal in the aftermath of that summit is historic. It really requires careful dissection.
Let's look at his exact words. Prince Faisal declared that all the diplomatic trust that had been rebuilt since the two countries normalized relations in 2013 has been, quote, completely destroyed.
Completely destroyed.
Yeah, and he issued an ominous warning that Saudi Arabia and its allies possess significant capabilities and that their patience is not unlimited.
Very strong language.
Very. And he explicitly threatened that the kingdom reserves the right to military action, keeping both political and non-political responses on the table.
That phrase is key.
Right. And finally, there was a joint statement from the assembled ministers demanding Iran halt proxy support, warning specifically about threats to freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? I want to push back on the framing here a little bit because diplomats are famous for their measured, careful language.
They usually are, yeah.
They usually speak in caveats and nuances to ensure there's always a way out. Saying a decade of trust is completely destroyed and floating non-political responses. I mean, that feels like crossing the Rubicon. Is there any mechanism left in statecraft to walk back from this kind of absolute rhetoric?
This raises an important question about where the actual point of no return lies in modern diplomacy.
Right.
You are entirely correct to zero in on the phrase completely destroyed. Diplomatic relations, especially complex formalized agreements like the 2013 normalization, they're built on intentional ambiguity.
There's always wiggle room.
Exactly. Diplomats always leave a backdoor cracked open for future quiet dialogue. But when a foreign minister publicly declares that trust is not just strained or, damaged, but completely destroyed, they are intentionally welding that backdoor shut.
Wow.
They are publicly establishing a new hostile baseline.
They're sending a signal to their allies, their adversaries, and their own military commanders that the old rules of engagement from the past decade are just officially void.
Precisely. And the introduction of the term non-political responses is just a masterclass in aggressive diplomatic signaling.
Because it sounds polite, but it's not.
Right. It intentionally strips away the ambiguity of economic sanctions, embargoes, or United Nations resolutions. In the lexicon of international relations, non-political is an explicit euphemism for hard, kinetic military force.
It's a threat of war.
Basically. It places the threat of direct military strikes squarely on the table without technically declaring war. But strategically, I'd argue the most vital part of that joint statement is how it pivots to focus on a collective response, specifically tying the entire crisis to the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, the joint statement warned that threats to freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz demand a collective response.
Oh.
We hear about this waterway constantly in global news.
All the time.
Why is the Strait of Hormuz always the ultimate trump card in these geopolitical standoffs?
Because it is the ultimate geographic choke point of the global economy.
Okay.
Visually, if you look at a map, the Strait of Hormuz is a remarkably narrow waterway. It's only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point.
That is tiny.
It really is. It connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean of the Arabian Sea. But through that tiny, vulnerable bottleneck flows a massive percentage of the world's total oil and liquefied natural gas supply.
So it's basically the jugular vein of the oil trade.
Exactly. By explicitly threatening navigation in that strait, you are no longer just threatening the localized security of Saudi Arabia or the UAE.
You're threatening everyone.
You are directly threatening the energy supply chains of Asia, Europe, and the Americas.
It is a brilliant, if terrifying, strategic pivot by the summit ministers. They are basically taking the breakdown of bilateral trust between Saudi Arabia and Iran and forcibly linking it to the precarious future of global navigation.
Yes.
They're looking at the international community and saying, hey, because of these attacks, the world's most critical transit route is now at risk. This isn't just a Gulf problem anymore. This requires a collective global response.
And it internationalizes the conflict instantly.
Because everyone needs that oil.
Right. It forces major global powers who might otherwise stay on the sidelines to weigh in because their own economic survival literally depends on the fuel flowing through that strait. The velocity of this escalation is really what makes the current landscape so uniquely dangerous.
It truly is dizzying to look at the timeline.
Yeah.
I mean, what began just weeks ago as a localized clash on February 28th between the U.S., Israel, and Iran instantly metastasized.
Overnight, almost.
Yeah. We are now looking at a Gulf-wide crisis that has physically impacted all 6 GCC member states. It has threatened massive global energy infrastructures like Ras Laffan, forcing evacuations and completely shutting down the spot market.
Which affects everybody.
It has resulted in literal ballistic missiles flying over the heads of diplomats in Riyadh, and it has completely shattered a decade of diplomatic normalization, putting the world's most vital maritime choke point on high alert.
Understanding the architecture of how these specific dominoes fell, it's really the only way to navigate the headlines that will inevitably follow this briefing.
And as a quick reminder to you, our listener, everything we've explored today, the dates, the targeted LNG facilities, the intercepted missiles over Riyadh, and the severe diplomatic warnings, it all comes directly from the source briefing. We simply laid out the mechanics of the crisis, the claims of the nations involved, and the implications of their actions. We're doing this without taking any geopolitical sides.
Yeah, because the facts on the ground are stark enough to warrant intense global attention, completely regardless of political leanings.
Absolutely. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think back to those nuclear control rods of diplomacy we discussed at the beginning.
Right, the 2013 agreement.
If the careful, painstaking trust built since 2013 can be completely destroyed in a matter of weeks, and if vital global choke points like the Strait of Hormuz are now explicitly put on notice, what does the actual threshold for a collective military response look like today?
It's a scary question.
It is. In an era where a handful of pre-planned missiles can force the emergency shutdown of the world's largest gas plants, while simultaneously flying over the heads of the very diplomats trying to stop a war, how quickly could one single miscalculation in the Gulf permanently rewrite our global alliances?
It only takes one.
Exactly. Keep an eye on the Strait. Until next time.